Welcome to Catholic Conversations. This is your host, Adrian Fonseca. And today I have a special treat for everybody. We're called Catholic Conversations. And the reason why it was called that originally was because my friend Max and I started this podcast, and it was me and him having a conversation, but he left me to join the Norbertines. Now he's Braciare. So everybody's like, why do y'all call yourself Catholic Conversations if you're just you? Well, that's why. But today it's going to be back Catholic Conversations because I have a guest on the show, rare opportunity to have a guest on the show. Trevor is the founder or co-founder, I suppose, of Tridentine Brewing. And he brews beer in his with his family, and it's pretty awesome. I got to say, especially the artwork itself is amazing. The good news is it's amazing, and we're going to talk about all things brewing. We're going to talk about the history of brewing. Is it a sin to be drinking? Is it where's the line when we drink too much? What was that all about? And is it Catholic? Was a miracle of Jesus actually turning water into grape juice? I don't know. We're going to find out. But the bad news is you can't actually buy the beer, but we're going to talk about that too. So Trevor, good morning, or I guess not good morning, good night. It's 9:20 in Houston, Texas. What time is it? Where are you at? And what time is it over there?
Yeah, Adrian. Well, thank you very much for having me on. I'm really, really pleased to be on tonight. Yeah, it's Central Time here. So I live about an hour south of Chicago, 60 miles south of Chicago in Illinois. So Central Time as well. So
Awesome.
9:20 p.m. here too.
Perfect. And what are you drinking today?
Well, I've got here one of our Irish red ales. So it's called Life is Worth Living Irish Red Ale. So for all those who have a great devotion to Fulton Sheen, you'd appreciate this beer.
Amen. I know we were talking off air that whenever I was in the novitiate, my name was Brother Fulton Marie. So I have a much love for the Fulton Sheen. I know that's a controversial opinion among many, but I love Fulton Sheen. I think he's great. And so that's great. I'm drinking, I can't even say the name of this beer. It's French, and anyone who listens to me for any length of time, no, I can't say anything that's not just Southern English. Like if it's even like British English, it's just over for me. So I don't even know if I'm going to try. So if you're watching it, if you're listening, you're not going to see it. But if you're watching it, you can see what it is. If not, I apologize. You're just not going to get it. But it's a French Benedictine beer. So I don't know if it's actually from a real Benedictine monastery. There's a lot of imitation, but we'll see. Trevor was very kind and sent me some of his beer and sent me an amazing care package. I'm going to be posting that because it was really cool. All these magnet stickers and man, I'm just going to be wasting time here. But Emperor Charles of Austria, he was you sent me a sign for him, the Habsburg beer, and here you have it. Perfect. So if you're watching, you can see it there. My little sister, and if you're watching it, I'm going to add this picture into the video. My little sister did a picture. She's an artist, and she's an amazing artist. And she did a pencil drawing of Emperor Charles, and it looks like one-to-one. Looks like a photograph in black and white, and she did it with graphite. It's amazing. So I'm going to be posting. That's going to be right here whenever you're watching it. But praise be to God. Before we waste any more time, because we've been already going, and I have not even talked about anything at this point. I just like talking to you. Tell me about the history of brewing. You mentioned in some of your other podcasts that it might even trace its lineage all the way back to the Bible, which I was surprised about. I was thinking you're going to say like Middle Ages. So tell me a little bit about the history of brewing.
Yeah, of course, Adrian. So yeah, the history of brewing and of course, production of alcohol goes back to the earliest times that we can trace back. I mean, so 5,000-6,000 years ago, we can find traces of alcohol even in present day Iran and China in certain containers, for example. So it goes back that far. Now we've got better records from Egyptian times. 1000 BC, 2000 BC, we've got pretty good example of the Egyptians brewing beer. Now, what you think of as beer now is actually completely different than what the Egyptians made. The Egyptians made something akin to a porridge, actually, and they called it beer. Actually, they didn't really understand the fermentation process. So they just set out all the ingredients, and the fermentation spontaneously occurred. And then they had this porridge-like material that you could drink with a straw. So we've
Okay,
come
I want to pause you there for a
ways.
second because I remember you saying in one of your other interviews that y'all used to call they used to call brewing God is good or something like that. Can you tell me about that? Because that just reminded me of that. You're saying like,
Oh
yeah,
yeah.
basically they didn't know how it worked. They were just like, we just throw the stuff together and then God does some miracle and it's delicious.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, and so I can't really speak so much to whether or not the Egyptians said that,
Hmm.
but certainly up until Louis Pasteur in the 19th century, the process behind fermentation and what yeast does wasn't actually really understood. So prior to that, the monks especially, so it was really the monks who called the fermentation process God is good, indicating the divine providence of God and gifting us alcohol, and really the process behind it. They had trusted God to take care of that. Of course, that's true, right? I mean, that still isn't lost. I mean, God is working through the yeast to create the alcohol, but now we understand the process fully. But yes, it was called God is good
Praise be to God. That's
during the
awesome.
Middle Ages.
That's really cool. I interrupted you. Back to the Egyptians. Where were you?
Yeah, so there was the Egyptians, but then also even for the Hebrews, the Israelites, there is really strong biblical foundation to believe that the Hebrews actually even offered beer to God in the temple. So in the Bible, I forgot the exact Hebrew name for it, but it's strong drink is what it's referred to. And back then there wasn't, for example, there wasn't whiskey or anything like that. So
Right.
the strong drink that they're really referring to would really be by process of elimination beer. So that's what biblical scholars believe it to be,
Not
beer. So
wine.
beer, not wine. I think that they actually called out wine specifically
Oh, okay.
in the Old Testament and the New Testament. So they know the word for that. But this was separate, the name for beer. So it's believed that yes, beer and wine was offered uh, in the temple in Jerusalem. So it goes back that far. Now, besides from its biblical basis as well, beer was also a popular drink, in the Greek and the Roman empires. And so, actually, wine was considered the superior drink of the upper class, and beer of the lower class. So that's how it was viewed in Roman times. But as the pagan Roman times kind of morphed into, after Constantine, the Christian Roman Empire, then as monasteries became established, the monks started to take up, the art of wine making and beer making. Saint Benedict initially didn't actually want the monks to make any alcohol. He actually wanted to put in their constitutions that they would not have alcohol, but he got a lot of blowback from the monks, and so he decided to keep it. And so that's where the tradition came from, of the monks actually brewing beer or making wine. And so especially in more northern areas of Europe, where it wasn't as advantageous to grow the grapes and whatnot, then beer became more prevalent. And so there was, as monasteries spread throughout the north, Germany, England, Ireland, then the monastic breweries sprung up as well. And so as early as there's records going back to back to the 700s of monasteries brewing. I think that they believe it obviously occurred much earlier than that, but we've got records going back that far to prove it, like paper records. So it's a very long monastic tradition. In fact, the monks can really be credited with the beer that I think everyone knows today. So, from the more porridge-like material to what you experience now. So let me give you a few examples of some of the innovations that the monks brought into the process. So, for example, they added, and I know this will get into IPA at some point, but beer has a bittering agent. It was called gruit at one time, which was a combination of all different types of herbs at one time to add a bitterness to this, to balance out the sweetness of the grains. So it was this mixture that was used previously for that bitterness. It included things like rosemary and other wild herbs. But actually the monks introduced hops, I believe in the 12th or 13th century, they started to introduce hops, and then that became mainstream by the 1300s, the use of hops as the official bittering agent. And that was the gold standard. The monks also introduced boiling into brewing. So prior to the monks introducing that, beer was not necessarily sterile. So this also was a big factor in medieval times or Middle Ages, where not all the time was the water sources real great. So the monks would even supply the local communities with beer, children even. So the beer back then was not always so strong. It might be only 1% or 2% alcohol in some cases. But they would provide that in lieu of drinking water because they had perfected or brought in the boiling process. And so the beer was, clean and could be consumed without risk of contamination. And so there's other parts of the process as well that the monks added in and refined as well. But yeah, beer today would not be what it is without the monks. That's for sure.
Wow, that's super fascinating to me, especially the idea that they had to drink beer instead of water. That's just so foreign to modern man's concept. And so that whole idea just seems like, what? That doesn't make any sense. But it makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because we didn't have the modern purification systems, and the beer wouldn't have been as strong, right? It would have been a lighter kind of beer. It's probably just a little bit of alcohol. I mean, I know St. Dominic, whenever he was, he would drink a lot of wine, but he actually didn't want to drink wine, and he wanted to drink water, which was bad for him. And so his superior back forced him to drink wine, and so he would have water and then pour wine in it and then drink it that way. So it was watered down wine. So it was always a thing in the monasteries and even in the mendicant orders to have drinks like that.
Yes, and so definitely, as you said, Adrian, the beer content, it wasn't 8% alcohol by volume beer. It was lighter, so 1-2%, but there were some stronger varieties as well, like maybe like 4% or something like that. But yeah, for like normal consumption, it would be like 2% or something like that. Right. Because when you think about it, like, oh, there's small children consuming it. Yeah, it was a pretty low alcohol percentage. Now, breweries really, continue to expand, of course, being attached to monasteries. So it was breweries were primarily associated with monasteries, up until I'm not saying that there wasn't any standalone monasteries run by lay people, but it was primarily something that the monks did up through the French Revolution. So up until the French Revolution and the Napoleonic era, there was something on the order of more than 1,500 different monastic breweries.
Oh, wow.
In Europe. So there was a lot.
There's only like less than a dozen in America?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oh, yeah. In America, yes. But in Europe, though, what happened is it got completely wiped out in the French Revolution and by Napoleon. So it went from something like 1,500 monasteries to about 30, I think, in 1830. Yeah. So it really, the evil forces of the revolution really completely wiped out, the monasteries, of course, more importantly than
I'm gonna keep that in mind whenever I have these discussions. I'm gonna be like, you do realize the French Revolution tried to wipe out beer, right? Yeah, that's gonna be like a talking point from now on. So thank you, I appreciate that.
Another knock against the French Revolution.
Exactly.
Yeah, so that's and so that really put, of course, a damper on brewing in Europe and the progression of brewing. And so, of course, there were some additional lay breweries that started up, and even in some of the former monasteries over time, there were lay brewers that ended up taking up the mantle, so to speak, and would brew in the monasteries. So I think, for example, Adrian, some of the beers that you have, that may be the case where it was brewed in. It may actually even be in the monastery, but it may be possibly the beer that you've got still a lay beer brewed in a monastery that survived. So yeah, that kind of brings us up until I guess looking at more American times with beer going across the ocean. So
pond,
of course,
people say.
Yeah. And so in America, of course, we live in a very Protestant nation, puritanical nation. And so, of course, there was there's still tons of beer here, especially from, Irish, English, German, Belgian settlers that came here. And so there are certain states, for example, the Midwest, Wisconsin, certain areas, even where I'm at, there was a very large German brewery, German Catholic brewery that was founded, more than a century ago. And so brewing culture was very healthy in the United States in the 19th century. In fact, so much so, I think that there was at one time, maybe someone's going to fact check these numbers, but I think there was something like 5,000 breweries in the United States prior to Prohibition. But then, of course, we all know what happened with Prohibition. There was a lot. I won't go into a whole spiel on Prohibition right now. Suffice it to say, there's a lot of different factors that fed into Prohibition. And in 1919, of course, it was added to the Constitution that drinking was illegal, and that was the case for a good, I believe 12 years, something to that effect. Well, sorry, a little bit longer, 14 years. 1933, it was repealed with the 21st Amendment. And so that was all fine and great, of course. However, the damage was really done to craft brewing in the United States. And there was only a handful of breweries that even survived, making things like root beer and other beverages that were actually able to rise from the ashes. And so it led to really a situation where there was a very standardized set of beer and very large conglomerate of companies. Think of your Budweiser, Miller, Coors, Pabst, things of that nature, which are really brewed like a single type of beer, like a Pilsner, for example. And that was kind of standard fare, really all through, from the 30s up until really the 1980s. Where there was a bit of a sea change, where people really started to rediscover our past and to look at the rich patrimony, if you will, of here's all these beers that have been handed down to us, all these different styles. We're missing out on all this. Let's start to bring these things back. Let's look at actually trying to craft a really great beer again. And so that was really the start of the craft beer revolution. We can trace its roots back to the 1960s, actually, but really it took off in the 80s and the 90s. And so now today, I mean, there's several thousand craft breweries in the United States. So yeah, it's really exploded. It's very, very popular. And even amongst not just breweries, but even home brewers as well, which is what I am. So in the United States alone now, it's believed that there are about 2 million home brewers. Yeah, so it's a lot. Now, so a lot of those I'm sure they went to, they just picked up a package, brew kit, and they tried it once. I know that's all fine and great.
We tried that once.
Yeah, so there you go. You're amongst the
there
2
you go.
million,
I'm amongst the 2 million. There you go.
You're a brewer too.
I'm a brewer too. It turned out terrible. It was not good. We
First
tried
one
to,
always turns out terrible.
Yeah, we tried to make a Hefeweizen, and it was like extraordinarily sour. We were like, why is it so sour? And so it was a disaster, but it was a good experience. We might need to try that again. It was a couple years ago, so.
Try it again. It always, the first time always doesn't go well. And that's to be expected. And there's a lot of things that you learn along the way. So but yeah, you know what? The nice thing about craft beer, and I guess we could tie this back to the church in a certain way, which is, I guess, the kind of this reawakening again, looking back to our tradition, looking back
Mm.
to the cyclical nature of beers. You know, it went from here's this very single note Pilsner, which is, I mean, Pilsner is fine. It has its own context. It's a good summer beer, for example, good staple beer. But that was like the only thing that was available
Mm.
in the United States, and it didn't matter what brewing company you went to. That's really what you were getting
Mm.
at the end of the day, whether it was a Budweiser or a Coors or Pabst or whatever. And so, really, this whole revolution, so to speak, or
A counter revolution.
revolution. It's a counter revolution.
There you go.
Thank you. I was going to say it's not the right word because it's restoration of. I had to sneak that word in there. It was really a restoration or coming back to tradition of what had really been lost and a rediscovery of that. And so, another reason why I love craft brewing and why my family loves it, besides from the great beer, is the traditional aspect of it.
Yeah, I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but in America during Prohibition, what was going on with the church? Considering we have to have wine at the very minimum, and drinking is just part of Catholic culture. And so, I mean, I know a lot of Catholics in Ireland. We interviewed someone maybe a year ago at this point, who is from Ireland, and they have like the League of the Sacred Heart, I believe, and they commit themselves to never drinking, but not out of considering it a sin. Instead, it's because of the drunkenness in Ireland. They offer it up, recognizing that alcohol is a good, and they give it up willingly in order to make reparation and to have the conversion of other drunken family members. And so all these things are happening around this time. Do you know what's going on in the church in America during Prohibition?
Yes. So during Prohibition, well, first of all, there was a constitutional amendment, which it's the 19th or the 20th. I think it's maybe the 20th Amendment. Sorry, I'm getting it wrong. Someone's going to come after me for that
19th
one too.
is women's voting, I believe. So
it must be the 20th. Sorry. So the 20th Amendment, which prohibited alcohol, left it up to Congress to pass a law for enforcement, which was the Volstead Act. And so the Volstead Act actually had provisions in it which said that for religious services and for if it was medically necessary, that alcohol could also be prescribed.
Okay.
So the church was able to still get wine for mass, and if alcohol was necessary to be prescribed, it was still able to be prescribed medicinally. Now, some people abuse that part a little bit every now and then, but so that's what was going on there. I do know that the church did oppose, at least there were church leaders that opposed prohibition. So, for example, there were monasteries in the U.S. at the time that brewed and very reluctantly gave up brewing, actually. There was also I think it was the Archbishop or Cardinal of Boston, and I forgot his name, but he had a quote as well at the time that prohibition was passed, and he basically said it was an extremely anti-Catholic law, that it's against Christ's church. So he was very specific. So he was also Irish.
Nice.
So speaking of the Irish, so yeah, the church definitely opposed it, but of course, again, it's not necessarily, especially then, wasn't really a Catholic nation. So that part is what it is. But yeah, it was definitely not, by and large, was not supported in the church. Although I know that there were Catholics that were definitely part of the temperance movement.
Right, I'm sure.
And I mean, you do bring up a good point as well, Adrian, about temperance and the Sacred Heart League, like you're talking about, and the Catholics that are involved in temperance, because there were good reasons why, or there were good concerns, let's just put it that way, of why prohibition came up. So there was a lot of drunkenness, for example, a lot of fathers that were deadbeats that were going out getting drunk. And so that was a huge push behind prohibition in part. Unfortunately, just simply, sometimes just banning a substance doesn't really necessarily correct the underlying problems with it, especially a substance like alcohol, which, of course, as we've kind of talked about the history of it, going back to the Old Testament, has definitely been sanctioned by God. I mean, we can get into that part in a moment, but so there's definitely good reasons to abstain, of course, and I think it's very noble to do that. Certainly, even I know it's very popular amongst many Catholics, even if they don't abstain entirely from alcohol, for even things like Lent. It's a good reset to detach ourselves from things like alcohol. So that can definitely be a very good thing.
No, yeah, definitely. And I think a lot of this, so I Googled it while you were speaking, and it was the 18th Amendment, and then it was revoked. So then later on, they must have replaced the 18th Amendment with a different 18th Amendment. I'm sure that's probably what happened. But anyway, so that was the 18th Amendment just before the fact checkers come after us. And
too late, Adrian.
Too late. They're already on us. It's there. It's in the comment section already. And so going backwards a little bit, I want to talk about. I have two questions, and one takes us backwards a couple hundred years and a couple thousand years. The other question takes us to the modern day. So I'm just going to throw them both out there. Choose which one you want to pick up. One, your family. I'm curious about. You said in a previous, I was listening to your other interviews, how your grandmother was brewing during Prohibition. So that's pretty awesome, and very Catholic, very very awesome, good stuff right there. But also going backwards. I was listening also, do you have all your different beers that are named after saints, named after different situations? And so there's a great tradition among Bridget of Sweden, I believe, is one of your beers. I want to hear about the story of the Lake of Beer, what that's about. And so whatever you want to pick up there, I'm just going to drop that out there and let you pick up the pieces.
Yeah, sure, Adrian. So, well, first of all, you mentioned my grandmother. I believe my great grandmother, actually, she brewed beer in the bathtub in her apartment in Chicago during Prohibition.
Delicioso.
So yeah, I mean, I don't know how great it was. It doesn't.
I'm sure she cleaned the tub beforehand.
You'd have to. I mean, so she did that. I mean, I guess do what you can with what you have available in your means, and certainly it was illegal. So that was kind of the very, very far off roots of Tridentine, and then that then there was a little bit of a gap. So we weren't a bathtub brewing family for 100 years. It wasn't like that. So it was after a little bit of a gap after Prohibition, and then my paternal grandfather brewed as a hobby during the 80s and 90s, and then my father learned from him, and my father Jeff is our brewmaster. Nice. And so after my grandfather died in the late 90s, my father Jeff, he took a bit of a hiatus from brewing, and then until in 2013, actually, when he was moving out of his house, or out of their house, my parents' house, I was helping him move. I found old brewing equipment. I asked my father, "Hey, let's try this out. Why don't you teach me brewing? Didn't you brew with Grandpa?" And so anyway,
nice.
He taught me how to brew, and that was kind of the genesis of it. And so started off a few times a year brewing, and then we really started to get serious in 2018, 2019. And so my father was going to retire from his full-time job, and he really loved brewing. And we thought, okay, let's actually go to the next level. So we went from kind of those packaged kits. It's called extract brewing, which is the entry level, which is great. I'd encourage
that's what
anyone
I did. Extract brewing.
Extract brewing, yep. So it's great to do extract. It's a good start. But then when you're ready to take the next level, all grain brewing is kind of where it's at, which is really you're doing everything that a commercial brewery would be doing. You're starting
just on a smaller scale.
Just on a smaller scale, right, exactly. Okay. So we decided let's go ahead and do that. So we built out a home brewery in my basement, repurposed some space, and really got that going. It's since moved to my father's basement. It's much larger area, and so we've been recently enjoying that the last 6 months or so since we've moved over there. But anyway, so we can talk more about some of the history of Tridentine a little bit later, but I think you had talked about, Adrian, the beers, some of the beers that we brew, and for example, Saint Bridget of Ireland.
Of Ireland,
We've
right.
got, yeah. So
That's different from Bridget of Sweden. Okay.
Yes. So Saint Bridget of Ireland, she is here. I'll put this up here if everyone can see it. So that's her. That's our beer label for Saint Bridget. St. Bridget's Lake of Beer Irish Stout. And so shout out to Tracy L. Christensen of Portraits of Saints. She let us use her image of St. Bridget for that. But the whole story behind St. Bridget, who's actually co-patroness of Ireland with St. Patrick, is so she was actually she started out pagan, was converted, I believe, by St. Patrick.
Nice.
And yeah, so they're going way back to the 300s. And so she founded, I believe, the first convent in Ireland.
Wow.
And there is a story attributed to her. So there's a poem from at least they can trace it back to the 10th century, but they believe it originated with St. Bridget, a poem that she wrote about heaven being a lake of beer. So she conceptualized heaven as, to bring it back to people, like how great it is, by saying that God and all the saints are all sitting around this gigantic lake of beer in heaven, and they're all having a great time, enjoying the beer,
nice.
Enjoying each other's company. So it's a great vision of heaven, I think, for all of us. I'm sure heaven's way better than just a giant lake of beer, but it was a great visual as well to really conceptualize that.
I think a lot of people would be like scandalized by that kind of idea today. But it's, in a sense, I'm really good friends with. I don't know if you're familiar with the TFP.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Yes, I'm very good friends with the TFP. I've been to their house in Spring Grove there, and I visit with them quite often. And a phrase they use is convivium, which I've never heard before hanging out with the TFP. And then the idea of convivium is, conversation, but not just any conversation, but conversation around your meal, around drinking, around a good drink. And so that idea of a lake of beer just makes me think of like the ideal world of convivium. You're sitting around with the saints in heaven, and you're enjoying a good brew. You're having something that's wholesome. You're not abusing it. And I forget who the saint is that said this, but they said something along the lines you might know. We thank God for beer by not abusing it, or something along those lines. And so that idea of having that kind of sense of conversation, of friendship, of merriment around drinking, I think that's lost in today's culture because of the stigma around alcohol due to the Puritanism and a lot of the abuse of it. Because I know a lot of family members who have abused alcohol in the past, and then that kind of affected other family members. So they're just like, oh, alcohol, there's nothing good about alcohol, because they've had bad experiences with it, and that's understandable. St. Thomas talks about that, not scandalizing those who have a bad disposition towards alcohol. But yeah, so what do you, whenever you think of Bridget of Ireland, not of Sweden, talking about a lake of beer, what kind of image does that bring to mind to you?
Yeah, I think you illustrated very, very beautifully, Adrian. And really, I guess one of the main purposes of drinking beer and brewing and having, alcohol being available is really to, facilitate those conversations, facilitate those relationships. It's not that alcohol exists necessarily in this, or supposed to exist in some vacuum where it's supposed to be abused. And so really, I mean, that's primarily why God gave it to us, to, ease those conversations. Sometimes you might be a little bit, you might need a little bit of something to kind of, calm tensions down and nerves. And so really alcohol just helps to enable that. And so, yeah, absolutely. I can see that in heaven, just helping to, facilitate those conversations. Not that they probably need it in heaven, but,
like having a pint with
really
Aquinas.
Pint with Aquinas, exactly. So yeah, no, it's a great visual, and I think it really helps to illustrate, the proper use of alcohol and how we should use alcohol, with family and friends, with a meal. So it has its proper context.
Wonderful. Praise be to God. Another thing, uh, I just love the idea that you have behind your brewing company. I want to talk a little bit about that, but then I want to get into the reason why that I wanted to have this conversation to begin with. Originally, months ago, I had posted something about like IPAs being the absolute worst thing ever, and you're like, "Oh, it's not though. It's not. There are good IPAs." And I'm like, "I don't know. I've never seen a good IPA." So we're gonna have to talk about IPAs in a second, and we're gonna have to talk about the different kinds of beers and how that works. How does how do they turn out different? Because that just doesn't make sense to me. God is good. But first, I want to talk about your ministry with Tridentine Brewing or Tridentine Brewing, and talk a little bit about the labels that you have, about why the certain ones are called certain things, and you talk a little bit about that. And also, I had tons of people. One person asked on Twitter, but I had tons of people because I was talking to my friends about this. They're like, I want to buy some of this beer. How do I get hold of some good beer? And then everybody loves your labels, and they're just super cool with all the help you're getting from various artists. So tell me about Tridentine Brewing. Why the name? What's the mission? And tell me about it.
Yeah, of course, Adrian. So back, I told a little bit of the genesis of Tridentine Brewing, and I kind of left off at like 2018, 2019,
Right.
when we put together a brewery in our basement, and we started with all grain brewing and kind of took that next step. And while we were going through that next step, actually in 2019, we wanted to decide on a name, because we've thought, well, we're already putting all this effort into it. All these breweries, and even many home breweries, have names, just like breweries. They name their beers as well. So we thought, let's put a little bit of thought into this. And so we went through about 30 different iterations of names. We batted it around the family for months and months. And we eventually decided on Tridentine or Tridentine, any way you want to say it.
How do you pronounce it? How do you pronounce it?
I say Tridentine, but I've been corrected by priests and by Ryan Grant as well.
So what we're gonna say is that the Mass is the Tridentine Mass, but the brewing company is Tridentine Brewing. They're just different. There you go.
They're just, you know what? My guide for this is really just the gums. So Trident and Dentine. If you put them both together, it's Tridentine. So there you go.
And I'm the king of mispronouncing words that are not English. So I'm all for just pronouncing it however. So there you go, folks.
So however you want to say it is totally fine with me. But we did decide on the name. And part of the reason was because we thought, okay, here's a great opportunity for us to do something related to our Catholic faith that really is missing out there with a lot of breweries. So many breweries are very leftist and secular in their causes.
Let me stop you there, right there, because in Houston we had I forget the name of it's Brash Brewing in Houston, Texas, and it was absolutely the worst thing ever. They had their beer come out called Black Mass, and they in honor of their release of their new beer, they actually stole a host from a Catholic church and then had a Black Mass at their brewing company. And it was absolutely the worst thing ever. You can go back. I did a 2 podcasts on it when it was happening. And it was absolutely scandalous. So we had a massive rosary rally outside of the brewing company, and we had a priest come out and pray with us with the fraternity. And it was a whole ordeal. It was actually really sad because one of the mother of the owners of the brewing company came out and prayed with us, who was a Protestant, and they were like, I didn't even know my child was a Satanist. I talked to them the other day, and she's been a Satanist. Her spouse is a Satanist, and I didn't know this. And they were scandalized. They ended up, God's blessing, the lady ended up coming to mass with us at the fraternity parish later that day. It was it was very, very crazy. And to this day, a group of parishioners from the fraternity parish in Houston goes out there and prays the rosary outside of it every week. And so it's a tragedy. Yeah, a lot of these brewing companies are very evil. That's why, it's so beautiful to see a Catholic doing this, even if it's on a small scale. I mean, you've reached national audience at this point, international audience at this point, but it's very interesting that there is that satanic element to it. Even in Houston, we have St. Arnold's Brewing, and the guy who did it is not Catholic. He's spiritual but not religious kind of thing, and he just thought that the Catholic imagery looked cool and was a good idea, so he ran with it. So it's always this way. They do LGBT things like that as well, and it's sad. But anyway, I'll let you continue or run with anything you heard there.
Well, holy cow there, Adrian. I did not know that was a thing. Well, God bless you and everyone else that went there and, prayed outside of that evil brewery. Oh my, wow. I did not heard that. So I guess that takes it to a next level, because I was just thinking about the rainbow agenda and, how most breweries push that. And, that's pretty bad enough. And then, okay, that's next level bad. So evil. So, wow. Okay. So we want to be the opposite of that.
Literally the opposite. You have Black Mass and then you have Tridentine.
Yeah.
There you
go. Wow. Okay. So yeah, we wanted to do something that really, stood in opposition to things like that, that are very well, I don't know about Black Masses and breweries, but, just the general, secular nature of breweries. I mean, quite honestly, most breweries, the names mean nothing half the time, most of the time. So why not take this opportunity to glorify God, to spread the faith? And so that was really one of the driving reasons, as well as we do some patriotic beers as well. So, that's something that's
you got
usually
the Second Amendment one.
attack.
There you go.
Yeah, Second Amendment one. Exactly. We have a fun Donald Trump one that we did a few years ago for Christmas, make Christmas great again. So,
there you go.
So it's fun stuff. But yeah, so that was part of it. And then why Tridentine as a name? So my father and our family really has had just a great devotion to the traditional Latin Mass now for the last 25 years or so. In fact, that really drew my father actually into the faith. My father, our brewmaster Jeff, is a convert, and so that really drew him in. Like from when he was reading the fathers of the church and just reading the church history, really didn't see when he would go with my mother to our local Nova Sordo church that, or no sort of mass, I should say, that he wasn't really getting that connection there till he went to St. John Cantius and saw some of the masses there. And then I think the light bulb went off for him. And so then we've been going to the traditional Latin Mass ever since as a family. And so
you grew up going to the traditional Mass then?
I did. So I was baptized in the Nova Sordo baptism, I should say, right? And then, yeah, actually since First Communion.
Wow.
So I'm 31. So yeah, since First Communion, we've been going to the traditional Latin Mass, all over, from indults in the Chicago Archdiocese to local diocese here to FSSP, the Institute. So kind of different places at different times. St. John Cantius. So, but yeah, we're really great devotees to the traditional Latin Mass.
Amen, amen. And then so that's amazing. I love that. I'm just so curious about this, because I was thinking about this. I was talking to some friends about your company or your business, or not either of those things, not a company or a business. Your home brewing. And the one thing that people kept on asking was like, how on earth can they afford to just like show up to these Catholic events? Because I saw you going to when the Habsburgs were showing up, and you're just bringing in cases of beer and giving them away to people. One of my friends, Alex, was there, and he got to try one of your beers there, and he took a picture, sent it to us, and we're like, what? And so like, how are you able to just give away all this beer?
Yeah. So, and I think I remember Alex actually from the event.
Praise be to God.
I got to meet him. Yeah. So really for us, it's kind of our main hobby. It's my father's main hobby now that he's retired. And so really, I mean, we kind of view it almost as like, an apostolate in a certain way, in a certain sense. And again, it's not necessarily we're not going out into the street. It's not like we're, Jesuits in, 16th century Japan risking our life to spread the faith or anything. But I mean, we do view it as more of a way to spark a conversation, plant a little seed in someone's head about the faith, and maybe they think a little bit more about it. And so for us, it's important. That's important to us. And anytime that we can also do something to support a great Catholic cause, such as the cultus, or spreading the cultus of Blessed Emperor Karl of Austria, for example, then because I have a great devotion to him, then we try to support those causes as well through the beers. So I think depending on the social media, it seems like we're ubiquitous out there and all over the place, but it's maybe not as big as it is in reality.
Right.
That was actually the one event where, although we plan on doing similar types of events in the future, where we brewed some special batches. We drove it out to Washington, D.C. for that event for the anniversary mass of Blessed Emperor Karl of Austria last year. So it's not a normal occurrence.
Okay.
It's not like an every week type of a thing, but
Which is part of your tithing.
Do enjoy it. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah. I mean, not that we don't give to the church or anything, but I mean, it's just we kind of look at it in that light.
Amen. Yeah. I want to shift a little bit because we could spend like another hour talking about all these different things. I don't want to take up too much of your time. I want to talk a little bit about the different kind of beers because up until literally a couple years ago, I was like pronouncing lager. And I didn't know that it was not lager. Like I just see these, I had no idea what these different beers are. I don't know what the difference is, and it's all beer to me. And so tell me, what's the difference between these different beers? Give me a general overview. You told me that you didn't tell me. You were telling someone else, and I was listening. How there's like hundreds and maybe even thousands of different types of beers, but in America it's much more simple because we just don't have that tradition of having those kind of beers. So it's like maybe a couple dozen different kinds in the U.S. as the common things. And so tell me about the generally, give me a general overview. Give me the general education.
Sure, Adrian. So really, let me start by saying that there's two main types of beer. So there's ales and lagers.
Okay.
So we could break it down like that. So lager is a beer that has yeast that is bottom fermenting. So the yeast likes, while the yeast is consuming, it's creating the alcohol, it likes to live on the bottom and it likes it cold. So and it takes a little bit longer period of time. So it can take a few months for a lager.
So lager takes longer.
Lager takes longer, yes. It's usually a cleaner beer. The yeast has more time to clean itself up. So towards the end, the yeast will eat yeast, and it really just clarifies the beer a bit more. And so that's a lager. So there's different types of lagers, but usually they're of a variety, such as like what you think of like an Oktoberfest style type of beer. So for example, like a Vienna lager is one, Munich lager. So there are those styles, and there's others. There's English and American style lagers as well. So when we talk about lagers, it's really just the type of yeast, and that the yeast likes it cold and it likes to take a long time.
So it's not really is it a flavor profile, or is it completely like the lager can be generally anything, any kind of flavor?
Really, theoretically, it could be any type of flavor.
Okay.
But typically, lagers are more, there are not, like, typically people don't think of lagers as like really dark beers.
Okay.
Most of like really dark beers, like a stout, for example, or a porter, are really ales.
Okay.
So usually most of the lagers are your cleaner beers that are a little bit lighter, that may also have a little bit of a malty, complexity to it. Usually they're not very hoppy. That's usually typically not the case. So that's typically the profile that goes with lagers, generally speaking. But lagers are not tied to a style per se. It's really just the yeast in the process.
And then, so what's an ale?
So an ale is a top fermenting yeast created by top fermenting yeast that typically likes it a bit warmer. And so when I'm saying these things like warmer, so it could be something like 60 to 70 degrees Fahrenheit is where it likes fermentation to occur, whereas maybe lagers are just above freezing.
Oh, wow.
Like literally, like it has to be at 35 degrees or something like that, which is why typically in Germany, for example, lagers were made in the winter and in the springtime,
okay.
because naturally it could stay at those temperatures and create the beer. But in any case, ales are they're more prevalent than lagers. It takes less time to create ales. Most of the time, ales are can range from a few days for fermentation, to a bit longer, maybe a few weeks, but it's a shorter duration of time. And again, even though it's not really tied to a flavor profile per se, there's a much broader range of beers that fall in the ale category. So anything from your IPAs to your stouts to your porters to, a nice, easy to drink summer blonde beer. So it kind of runs the gamut. So most beers that you're going to drink are likely ales. So the beer you're drinking right now, I guarantee you, is an ale, actually.
Okay, noted. And so so then what are like these like stouts and I'm trying to think of these other dark beers. Like, what are they then? You said they're ales. So what makes them look like that?
Yeah. So
And with that consistency, often they're a little thicker.
Yeah. So really a beer is made up of just a few components, which is water, barley, or the grain component, which can also contain things like wheat, but usually it's barley, water, hops, and yeast. And so that's all the ingredients in beer. And so it's between those components that you get your entire flavor profile. So there's many different strains of yeast that provide, flavoring. So, for example, the Hefeweizen that you were talking about earlier, that you tried, Hefeweizen gets a very distinct clove and banana flavor that's imparted by yeast, for example, and not by the grains. So sometimes yeast can give a flavor, but typically one of the biggest driving factors in the styles, whether something's dark or light, is the grain bill. So what are the types of grains? How much grains are being put into the beer? What's the style of grains that are used? So, for example, with a stout, it might be that you have a very heavy grain bill. So maybe like, for example, twice as many grains as you would a much lighter ale. And those grains might be like chocolate roast, for example, or a dark roast. So the grains we use in brewing are usually malted. So they go through a process whereby, they're processed so they get different flavor profiles. So you can buy chocolate malt, for example, or darker roasts. So that also imparts a certain type of flavor profile. So for example, in stouts, you might get chocolate flavors, you might get coffee undertones to it. And so that adds quite a bit of the flavor. And then the grain bill also drives the alcohol percentage. So the amount of grains that you put in, as well as the yeast, but the amount of grains that you put in drives the volume of alcohol. So if you put very, very few grains in, relatively, you're going to get a much lower alcohol percentage. And so that's what's driving that. And then lastly, there's, of course, the hops. And so the hops as well, there's many different varieties of hops that exist. And usually certain types of hops go with certain types of beers. So for example, for a Vienna lager, you're going to use German hops for something like that, or a very specific set of hops, not just anything typically. So that also is factored in as well. But yeah, I mean, talking about IPAs, because we were talking about that. There we go. Get to that.
The question is, why are IPAs terrible, and why does everybody lie about liking them? That's the question I have for you.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, first of all, let me tell you the genesis of IPAs. First of all, one of the brilliant things that the monks did with coming up with hops as a bittering agent was not just that it was a bittering agent for the beer and replaced what was called gruit, but also that it had a preservative effect on the beer. And so the beer would last longer, have a much longer shelf life. And so the English knew this as well for their colonies.
Right.
And
English
so
pale
in
ales
the,
are not nearly as terrible.
no, yes, it's not nearly, yeah. So there are degrees, right, of hoppiness depending on the pale ale, right? I mean, so pale ale is a really moderate version of an IPA. But the English really took the pale ale and modified it such that they could load up their ships in the 18th century with beer for India, for their colony in India, and it would last for the duration of the voyage there.
Oh, I see.
And they loaded up that beer with hops because hops is a preservative. So that was how it came to be and why it's called India Pale Ale. It's not that the Indians necessarily created it; it was the British that created it, but for their voyages there. Now the question is what about the American brewery scene? So
yeah, why
is
they keep
it
making
so
these
popular?
things? I'm convinced that people just pretend to like them because they think it sounds cool. That they're like, yeah, this is super gross and I love it. And that's what I'm convinced that that's the case. You're gonna change my mind.
Yeah, so I mean, okay, so a few things. Well, I will say first and foremost that I think that most craft breweries overplay their hand with hops, so that many of the beers that they offer are hoppy. And I think that there was a trend, I mean, that's been going the last 10 plus years where hoppy beers within craft brewing are kind of in vogue. But I'll say that. I mean, I talk with plenty of people and just on their preferences for beer, and there are IPA lovers out there, but
Allegedly.
there are plenty of people who are like, just the Jesuits like the IPAs,
right? Exactly.
Yeah, so, but they exist, right? But most people I talk to are like, you know what, I do like beers that are kind of back off the hoppiness and really have a little bit more malty character. So that's what I tend to find. So I think eventually there's going to be a course correct within craft brewing that they're going to tap the brakes on all the IPA stuff that they're doing or hoppy beers that they're producing. So that'll probably occur here in the not too distant future. But I will say, especially in traditional circles or conservative circles, when most people think of craft beer, they're thinking of a hipster living in downtown Chicago, Houston, with a man bun who likes to hang out, has his Black Lives Matter sticker on his Mac and loves to go to the local brewery and, sip on IPAs all day. And I think that that's kind of the vision people have in their mind for what a typical IPA drinker is. And so I think it gets a little bit of a bad rap, probably not totally undeserved, but I mean, then there's the taste component of it as well, right? Which is a lot to take in, especially if you're kind of starting out. I'm not saying you're starting out drinking. There's a lot of people that have had beer for a long time that hate IPAs, but especially like starting out drinking, like I hated IPAs as well. It's an acquired taste. I will say that. And I'll say that for other beer styles as well. So, for example, Lambeck's, which is a Belgian beer. Okay. I recently started had a few of those and, wasn't necessarily a fan at first, but it kind of grew on me. So that was nice.
Well, I know a lot of people, like my father, for instance, he grew up pretty much drinking Corona. That's about it. I was talking to one of my coworkers about the interview I was having with you today, and he was like, man, all these craft breweries, like, does he brew anything like that tastes kind of like a Coors Light? Because everything else is just not, it doesn't taste any good. All those fancy microbreweries, that's just not good. And so that's kind of his vision of these smaller breweries. And so what's the deal with why? So I guess there's a number of questions there. One is these Bud Light, Coors Light, Corona, all these like companies that are brewing these, why are they perceived by a lot of people to be gross? I mean, I kind of have the same perception. It's like, oh, those beers. Is that just is it just being a snooty, or is it actually not very good? And why do a lot of people prefer those over everything else, over what we would consider good beer?
Yeah, so I mean, there's plenty of people that love. I mean, so the area that I live in Illinois is very rural area, and I like to refer to it as Bush Light Hell, where I live,
Bush
because
latte?
there's just hell, purgatory, where. So it's like there's a lot of people. In fact, even including my paternal grandfather was big into Bush Light. My dad tried to convert him over to craft brew, and he wasn't having it. So we actually brewed a beer in his honor that is somewhat, your friend will appreciate this. It's called Quartermaster Jerry, after my grandfather, which is lighter. It's a good version of, we'll just say, a lighter beer like, Budweiser or Bush. So we do brew something that light. It's about as light as it's going to get for us. So people do. So there's a few reasons why people, many people don't like that style of beer, which is, it seems like most of and there are differences, but again, like your Miller, your Coors, your Budweiser, your Bush, Pabst, etc., the list goes on. These beers that have dominated the scene from the time of Prohibition. I mean, even still to the present day, they've got huge presence. It's kind of a one note type beer. Usually, it's a Pilsner, and it's not really that flavorful. It's good. Again, it's good for what it is. It's a nice summer beer, I find, to have, but it's usually one note flavor.
I mean, if it's frozen, it's delicious.
Yeah, if it's frozen and a hot day, I mean, fantastic. So I'm not putting down Pilsners necessarily, but a lot of the breweries as well. It's mass produced, and there's
cheap.
Not necessarily the care put into it. I mean, there's great consistency. I mean, they're putting out a very similar product all the time, but even then, a lot of the, for example, I think it's Budweiser, that uses a lot of like rice. So in many cases, they pull out a lot of their grains.
Is that still beer if they're using rice?
Yeah, I mean, it's still beer. I'd have to look into it a bit further, like, where's the line? I mean, that it's not like sake or anything like that, but it's they do use it in the process. Like, we don't use any rice or anything like that. So I mean, there are some, like, I don't know, corners that are cut as well, in my opinion, at least. And so I mean, look, some people love it. They've grown up with it. Some people just don't like craft beer, and they want something really light, and that's typically what these types of beers are, from Budweiser, Bush, Miller. They're really light. They're easy to drink, but then again, there's not much there other than, one note, and that's it.
Okay. Good to know. And I'm just going to throw out these two questions I got on Twitter. The rest of them we kind of talked about, and I'm just going to throw these two out, answer these questions, and we'll move on real quickly. One is thoughts on moonshine. Second one is, will he consider switching to wine instead of beer, or include some hard ciders? I know that TFP, they actually make their own cider in Spring Grove in Pennsylvania, and it is delicious. I've actually never drank, because I'm not a huge fan of like apple juice, and so I always kind of perceived cider tasting like apple juice, and so I was like, I don't want to try it. And they actually brought us some home brewed cider to we were having Thanksgiving. The TFP guys came over for Thanksgiving, and they brought us some cider from Spring Grove, and it was really good. And I was like, wow, that cider is actually pretty darn good. So anyway, that's a separate conversation entirely. But would you consider switching to wine instead of beer, or include some hard ciders?
Yeah. So, well, the hard cider is an easier thing to switch to, because the process is very, much more similar than, we'll just say, wine. Wine's kind of a different animal entirely. I mean, you can get kits for wine that they're almost like extract kits for brewing. Like, we can get like a beginner kit for wine, so you could do that, and that's relatively easy, actually. But I mean, if we wanted to, like, actually get, start from scratch. Like we'd have
The
to get
whole
the
thing.
grapes and press it, like the whole thing. Like if we really wanted to go for it. And so we'd really need a vineyard and a winery to do something like that.
So probably not.
So probably not. I mean, I do enjoy a good glass of red wine, but probably not that. The cider would probably be a bit easier. And in fact, there's in most brewing competitions, or many brewing competitions, they also have cider judging as well.
Okay.
And for mead, which is fermented honey. Really.
Oh, wow. I would love that. One of my friends was telling me about mead and how he loved mead, and I was like, where do you get mead? I don't see that anywhere. I was looking around the liquor store, and I'm like, I don't see mead anywhere. Where do you buy this?
You usually have to go to a specialty liquor store. So if you've got a larger liquor store near you, then you should be able to find mead. Sometimes it's by the wine as well. So usually it's a much stronger, drink, like 15% alcohol, something like along those lines. Usually it's a bit sweeter. Mead as well can come in like sweet and dry, and so it's also pretty ancient. It goes back to like the Egyptians and whatnot, with the fermented honey. So yeah,
no plans, but it's possible.
It's probably, yeah, mead definitely. So mead and cider are closer than wine.
Okay.
Personally, kind of tying in the moonshine question, personally, I would love to do distilling at some point. I haven't done distilling. Distilling is completely separate from brewing. But I think that would actually probably be easier to do than doing the wine, to be honest. So I would enjoy that. At some point down the line, we could do that. Technically speaking, it's actually illegal to do any distilling.
Oh, wow.
So you can, by federal law and state law, actually, you can, all 50 states allow home brewing. Federal law allows home brewing. It's technically illegal against federal law to distill. Now they've got to catch you in the act. So just because you have you can have the equipment to distill. You can have a still because you can make different essences of oil. You can use a still to make gasoline. So you can do all types of stuff with a still. So it's not illegal. It's not illegal to own the product or the end product. So you can own the moonshine. It's just like, you'd have to have a federal agent actually catch you in the act. So, so technically it's illegal. So we'd have a few more hoops to jump through for something like that. We're not doing it. Anyone's watching this, the feds, we're not doing it. We're not distilling.
Fed posting, all these Fed posters.
That's right. For all the Fed posters, we'll have someone come over from the ATF or something to investigate the brewery. We're not doing it. So yeah. So distilling is a bit of a different animal, although at some point I'd really like to get into doing it, honestly.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Yeah, you'll have to make a trip out to Spring Grove and see the guys make some cider over there. Great guys. I love the TFP. But to try to conclude, I want to wrap it up with this idea of doing things for the greater glory of God. We can, not everything. I mean, my podcast is called Catholic Conversations. I work at a Catholic radio station. We talk about Catholic stuff 24/7 all the time. But not everything that we do has to be explicitly Catholic in order for it to be Catholic. Could you leave us on that note about doing everything for the greater glory of God?
Yes. So yeah, our brewery, our motto is brewing beer for the greater glory of God. And that really takes up from the Jesuits' motto, which is, doing all things for the greater glory of God, which we should, right? And all things that we do. And as you said, Adrian, it doesn't necessarily have to be that everything. I mean, with the brewing company, it's unique that we package everything with like a saint label, our Lord, Our Lady, patriotic. So, I mean, that's pretty explicit in your face, but not everything that you do in your daily life necessarily has to be quite out there like that. But really, it's good to think about that for everything that we're doing, for our hobbies, our daily work around the house, taking care of our kids, our spouse, whatever the case is, to just keep that in mind. And so that's just another thing for us as well, which is kind of just driving the brewery and what we're doing, is just to keep that, as the main focus of what we're doing. It's not about, Trevor or Tridentine Brewing being great or the best or whatever. It's about God at the end of the day. And so that's what we got to keep our focus on.
Absolutely. Praise be to God. And before we go, where can people follow you? How can people support you? You mentioned a number of times, you're like, I might make an Etsy store. Did you make an Etsy store yet? People want to buy your stickers and your magnets. So these are high demand. How can people support you? How can people follow you? I prayed a rosary for you on my way over back to the studio because, I was like, I can't send you money for the beer, but, you said pray for you. So I'm going to pray a rosary for you right now. So I prayed a rosary for you. So tell me, how can people support you? How can they get in touch with you?
Well, that was the best gift you could have given, Adrian. I really appreciate that. And I mean, for anyone out there as well, we could definitely take your prayers of the brewery, prayers, continued prayers for discernment on, what we should do as next steps. So yeah, of course, we're not selling right now. We don't have a commercial license. It's something that's still being contemplated. I don't have an ETA on when exactly that'll come to fruition. But there are different avenues that we're looking at potentially being able to brew something and have it commercially available, at least locally in Illinois. And that's the other thing. There's an aspect of this where people ask me, can I get in my local grocery store in Texas or Washington State or Pennsylvania? I'm like, listen, I unfortunately, even if we go commercial, it'll be local.
Right.
And then hopefully we can get to a point where maybe we have a subscription service. That would be the ideal, that we could ship it to people, ship it to most states that allow alcohol shipment. There's about 20 US states that don't allow shipments of alcohol. So that's another hurdle. So eventually that would be fantastic if we can get to that point. But however, right now, we are looking at setting up, as you mentioned, Adrian, just like an Etsy store or some type of online store, because we had so much demand for things like, hey, I want to support, we'll have fans all the time say, or people that think the idea is awesome for the brewery. I want to buy a t-shirt with Tridentine Brewing. I want to buy a glass. I want to, some of the label artwork is fantastic. I want to buy that. So we want to make that available because, I can't just purchase thousands. I'd love to and just hand it out to everyone. I love the idea, but just so we make it available so people can purchase it if they want to support us that way. I mean, that's fantastic if you're feeling called to do that. So I want to have it up and running this summer.
Okay.
So I wish I could say, oh yes, by July 30th it's going to be up and running. I don't feel comfortable enough to say that, but we're actually taking active steps right now to get the store set up. And so, definitely follow us on our website, which is www.tridentinebrewing.com. We have, we're active on Twitter, which is at Tridentine Brew, on Instagram at Tridentine Brewing, as well as on Gab. And so, follow us there, because as soon as we, make announcements on things like this, the online store is available, or, if we ever make that leap and we go commercial and the beer is available, we're going to be, announcing it through social media. So, please feel free to follow us there or shoot us a message. I'm trying to catch up on all my emails that I have. So if you're listening to this, I haven't read your email yet, apologize. But, feel free to contact us through that form as well on our website. So we'd be really pleased to talk with you. So really that's what's on the horizon, Adrian. So we're looking forward and excited for this summer when hopefully we can launch something and, get the artwork out there, because I'm really, really pleased with the artwork, the artists that we've worked with. I mentioned Tracy L. Christensen from Portraits of Saints. We've got Chris Lewis from Barry's Catholic, who does amazing artwork as well. He has his own Etsy store if you want to check that out. And my brother Cameron, I mentioned my father and myself. My brother Cameron's our graphic designer, and he ties everything together in the labels and puts together everything beautifully. He created our main logos. He's behind our website and everything else. So we couldn't do anything without Cam.
Definitely
Tridentine Brewing would not be the same. So.
Oh yeah, if it was just the beer, had nobody tasted, like a very, very small portion of your fans actually have tried your beer. So most of it comes from the artwork and the arrangement. And so absolutely, your brother, big shout out to your brother. And last thing, normally, so we'll do a prayer at the end, but yeah, praise be to God. I think you're doing great work, and it's been a pleasure talking to you. We'll have to have you back if people start asking me questions. I said I was going to talk about the morality of drinking, stuff like that, but it's just gone on too long. I need to go to sleep. I got to be up at 4 a.m. for work in the morning. So yeah, I got to run home and take a quick nap. But praise be to God. We'll have to have you back on. We're going to do a show just on the morality of drinking. And so we'll have to have you back. It's been a pleasure talking to you. It's such a blessing. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, soapboxes, negativities, positivities, or anything in between, you can email me at fonsecaproduction@gmail.com or leave a comment down below if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening to the podcast, fonsecaproduction@gmail.com for any questions, comments, concerns, soapboxes, negativities, or positivities, or anything in between. And we'll close out in a Ave in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus.
Mater Dei, ora pro nobis.
Santa Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et in hora mortis nostrae. Amen. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Ghost. Amen. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you on a spot there. Praise be to God.